Welcome to the National Drug Screening video series, and today we have in a studio with us Mr. Joe Reilly, President of National Drug Screening, and we're going to be talking about post-accident questions and situations that employers want to know the answers to. Joe Reilly, appreciate you joining us today. Joe is the founder of National Drug Screening. He's also been in the drug testing industry since 1993. He's done training, spoken to conferences all over the country, been very involved in workplace drug testing for many, many years, well-recognized expert. And appreciate you joining us today to share some experiences and insights on post-accident testing, something that employers really have to deal with these days.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here to talk about post-accident drug testing. We get a lot of questions about post-accident drug testing, and I know you've got some of those questions. So fire at me.
I actually took our top questions that we had from employers. I figured that was the best way to start with this. So, understanding that employers conduct workplace drug testing, when it comes to post-accident, sometimes there's some confusion about that. Are there specific situations when you would do a post-accident test and when you would not do a post-accident test?
Yeah.
Employers, the answer is yes, and it varies. It varies greatly.
Let's break that down a little bit, and this may answer some other questions. So we've got to break it down into DOT-regulated businesses, the transportation industry, and everybody else, which is what we call non-DOT or non-regulated businesses. In DOT, it's very clear, okay? And it depends on the DOT agency. So there's 6 DOT agencies. We've got the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, which is the largest one, which regulates trucks and buses. So that's the most common, most often. There's also FAA, the airlines. There's also U.S. Coast Guard. There's also Federal Transit Administration, Federal Railroad Administration, and PISMA, the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. So I'm just going to give a quick example on the post-accident testing required criteria for FMCSA. So this is for trucks and buses. These are people operating commercial motor vehicles on commercial roads, 26,001 pounds or more, or transporting 16 passengers or more, including the driver, like a bus, or any size vehicle that's transporting hazardous materials, and that vehicle is required to be placarded with signage that they're transporting hazardous material. So here's the very specific criteria. There's an accident. Do we do a DOT drug and alcohol post-accident test? Only if 3 scenarios. 1, there's a fatality. If somebody dies, we do a DOT drug and alcohol test. Number 2, the driver gets a ticket and there's disabling damage to a vehicle requiring it to be towed away. Any vehicle in the accident gets towed away. 3, the driver gets a ticket and there's an injury to any individual in the accident requiring medical attention away from the scene of the accident. So real quick again, any fatality, always. Any other accident requires a ticket first, and then there's either a tow away of a vehicle or an individual is transported for medical attention. So very clear on DOT.
Yes.
FMCSA.
So DOT, it's required if it meets the criteria.
Exactly.
And so what about then for non-DOT? Is post-accident testing required for all non-DOT companies, or does that vary as well?
Okay. So it definitely varies, okay? And it should be specified in the company drug-free workplace policy, if you have one. If you don't have one, you should get one, okay? And it also may be required from your workers' comp insurance company, okay? And there may be different criteria among different companies, okay, for an accident or an injury. Probably if there's a fatality, it should always be done, okay? If there's disabling damage to a vehicle, maybe without a ticket, you don't necessarily have to require a ticket. If there's an injury and somebody's transported, maybe if there's a monetary amount of damage to company property, a lot of companies say anything over $500, any reportable workers' compensation accident where there's going to be a workers' comp claim. And, maybe you don't do a post-accident drug test if there's a bee sting or a paper cut.
Right. Well, and that was one of the really popular questions is so what is the criteria for that? And that's kind of a risk tolerance, question for the company. And they need to kind of be objective in that. Would you say they need to be more objective in kind of the criteria for the
Yeah, and they should, I'm working right now with a national company that are all 50 states, and we're writing a policy for them. And they come up with after consultation, several meetings with a whole focus group of folks at the company, they come up for that company with the specific criteria of when we're going to do a post-accident test.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's laid out in the policy. It's very clear. Somebody has an accident, the supervisor knows to look at that policy. If it meets this criteria, we do the post-accident test. And I don't know if this is on a question, but I just thought of it because this happened you may remember, Tom, it might have been 8 or 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There was this OSHA regulation that came out and said you shouldn't do post-accident testing. And then they kind of walked it back and said, well, you shouldn't do it if there's a bee sting, but
right. I wrote a few articles on that.
It meets certain criteria. You absolutely, there's no prohibition against post-accident drug and alcohol testing.
And I think that was one of the big confusions out there, that it seemed like it was actually prohibiting it, across the board. And it really just has to be more of an objective thing. One of the other questions that comes up from that is when can I do this? We'll get calls every once in a while, and somebody will say I need to do a post-accident test. Great. So when did we can help you with that? When did that happen? Oh, last week. Well, you kind of mentioned that in some of the other videos we've talked about specimen types and look back times and all that. But when should a post-accident test typically be done? Are there time frames? Does that vary as well?
Well, there's, the DOT has their standard criteria, which I'll go over in the time frames, and that would generally be the best practice for any type of post-accident testing. But before I get to that, there's an accident and, somebody's hurt, they broke their arm and they broke their hip and they broke their ankle, they got to go to the hospital first and get medical treatment. Okay. Mm-hmm. We don't stop along the way to get the drug test. The person needs to get medical treatment. That's always first. Okay. So beside making sure for medical treatment, the post-accident drug and alcohol testing should always be done as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But for alcohol testing, after 8 hours, it shouldn't be done.
Right.
So if 8 hours expires after the accident, don't do the alcohol test because you're not measuring any impairment that was 8 hours ago. Mm-hmm. For the drug test, again, it always should be done as soon as possible. And DOT says for both, you got to do it within 2 hours. But you have 8 hours. You have 8 hours. And for drug testing, you have up to 32 hours. So say somebody has an accident at 11 o'clock at night, okay? They're in the middle of nowhere. There's no drug test facility. There's no mobile collector. And they call us up and say, well, just wait till the morning, okay? If you're within the 8 hour window, you can still do the alcohol test, but you can definitely do the drug test because the next morning, you're definitely in the 32-hour window.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, that comes up is that employers really should be prepared for this to be able to, in the middle of nowhere, they may not have an option, but they should have that kind of prepared. But I want to go back to one thing that you mentioned about the medical attention, first. Obviously that makes somewhat common sense, you would think. Well, if they go to the hospital and they're getting or urgent care or wherever and they're getting medical attention, does that facility typically go ahead and do the drug test, or does it have to be coordinated, or kind of how would that work?
It depends, and it does have to be coordinated. But let me give you a couple examples. If they went to an urgent care center, like a Concentra, which is a national chain of urgent care center, occupational health centers, and that medical facility routinely does drug testing, that's one of their services, they can certainly do it. Mm-hmm. And they will do it, but you got to ask them to do it. They don't just do it, okay? You got to ask them to do it. And they're going to charge you money to do it, obviously, because they're doing another service. If it's an urgent care center that doesn't routinely do drug testing, they're probably not going to do it, okay? Same thing with a hospital, and it's going to be few and far between hospitals that routinely do employment drug testing, but there are some, okay? If you go into some remote areas and there's a hospital system and there's not really any other medical facility around, a lot of times those hospital systems actually have a drug and alcohol testing service. I've done training for many hospitals where we trained their entire staff, and they set up a business in that local community. So that type of hospital, they'll do it. Again, you have to request it. Some hospitals will say, no, we don't do that. And then some employers will say, well, can we send in a mobile collector to get some urine and to do a breathalyzer test? And some hospitals will say yes, and some hospitals will say no. And sometimes after, 2 or 3 conversations and going up to the ladder, maybe having your attorney call them, they might say yes after that. So it's a little bit of a struggle if the person's in the hospital. And obviously, if they're in surgery, you got to wait till they're done.
Exactly. I remember, not long after I started, this was obviously, many years ago, we had a call and somebody was trying to get this post-accident test, scheduled. And, okay, what's the circumstance? Oh, they're taking them to the hospital. It was a medevac flight, in flight, taking them to emergency surgery. And they were saying they wanted somebody to get the drug test first. The employer was, they were so focused on that somebody had been a fatality. It was DOT regulated that they had to get this done, that they didn't quite understand that regulation.
And that's a common myth. It is. That we got to get this done no matter what. It's got to be the first thing we do. It's not. Medical attention is the first priority.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then, for post-accident testing, are there any other, besides obviously making sure somebody's not under the influence or if they are being, aware of that and taking appropriate action, are there any other reasons for doing post-accident testing, such as dealing with something that we had talked about, I believe, in another video about workers' comp situations or something related to that, or other reasons they might be doing post-accident testing or that it might be affected by post-accident?
Yeah, so it's a great, interesting question because most employers that do drug testing do post-accident drug testing.
Mm-hmm.
But most employers that do post-accident drug testing don't know why they're doing it. Okay? So one thing, if they're positive, you've identified someone in your workplace that is a drug user, and depending on your policy, you might fire them, you might give them a second chance agreement or a last chance agreement, let them go get help for their drug problem and come back to work. Recovery. The President of the United States just issued a big recovery program. Okay. But one of the bigger reasons, and this is why you'll hear the workers' comp insurance company will say, make sure you get post-accident drug testing when someone has an accident. Okay. So there's something called the intoxication defense. A lot of people never heard of it. Okay. And I have a good friend who's an attorney, Bill Judge, and he taught me about the intoxication defense 25 years ago. And every state has a different version of their intoxication defense law, but I think it's 49 out of 50 states. The intoxication defense goes something like this, or some variation, okay? Person has an accident, you do a drug test, they're positive. You do an alcohol test, they're positive, either or, sometimes both, okay? There's presumptive evidence that the use of the drug caused the accident. And workers' comp will pay the medical fees, but they'll deny any indemnity further fees. Like they're not going to pay the person for the next 2 years when they're laying in bed when the use of the drug is what caused the accident. So there's definitely case law on this where someone went up a ladder, they fell down, they broke both their legs, they're positive for cocaine and alcohol. There's a presumption that the cocaine and the alcohol caused the accident, and therefore we're going to deny the claim, okay? And in most states, the employee is going to have to go back and say, well, no, that didn't cause the accident. But they're going to have to prove that, and it's going to be very difficult to prove, okay? So if they take it to court, what we advise employers to do whenever there's an accident, besides doing the post-accident drug test, is to document everything that happened, get statements from anybody that witnessed it, ask questions like, did this person seem to be impaired or anything like that? Were they acting strange? Get all the documentation. Because for many companies, larger companies, they could be self-insured for $1 million. They could be self-insured for $500,000, which means they pay the first $500,000 in claims. They pay the first $1 million in claims, and then the insurance takes over from there. And a lot of bigger companies will do that, okay? Even a medium-sized company. So a medium-sized company pays out $1 million claim, they could go out of business. So the intoxication defense is really the main reason why a company should do post-accident drug testing.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into kind of our last question of the day, that we have a lot of employers, are asking about this, and it kind of sums these things up. It's, what are the benefits of having a drug-free workplace, and how does post-accident testing fit into that? And I think that kind of goes to the point you were just making.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it goes back to we should implement a comprehensive drug-free workplace program. And the overall goal is safety. It's also a deterrent from existing employees using drugs. It's also a way not to hire somebody who's a drug user. So by its very nature, the drug-free workplace program will reduce accidents. Okay? And then because we have this program, and because we have a formal written policy that allows us to do post-accident drug testing, now we can do that post-accident drug testing and have a further way to perhaps save money. And my attorney friend Bill Judge always says, a post-accident drug test is a drug test that can make you money. It can make you money because you can save money.
That's true. That's true. Great insights for that. Joe, thank you so much for joining us in the video series about post-accident testing, questions that employers have. Final thoughts you wanted to share with the audience today?
Yeah, just if you're an employer and you're thinking about post-accident drug testing, you're having any challenges with post-accident drug testing, particularly if you work second shift or third shift, 24 hours, we have an oral fluid solution for that where you can do your own collection. So call us about any challenges with your post-accident drug testing program. And thanks, Tom, for the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Joe, for joining us today. Appreciate you taking the time to do that. And as always, check out our videos on nationaldrugscreening.com, our blog posts. We put a lot of great information out there. Make sure you like, follow, and subscribe our video channel here. You'll get updates on all the things that we're posting out there. We had some other great videos that tied into some of the things we talked about today. So make sure you check those out, and we'll see you next time.